welcome to the Bitcoin Business Podcast put on by Sovereign. I'm your host, Brandon Karpeles. And today with me, we have someone who is part of an industry that I really haven't talked too much about on this pod, despite being a huge part of my life. We've talked a lot about the finance part of my previous life, the food journey I've been on, the health journey I've been on, all sorts of stuff. But today we're going to talk about music. And many people might not know this, but I am a music junkie. Before I had a kid, and even still as I have my kid, I try to get to as many live shows as I can a year. I've followed a band called Widespread Panic around for over a decade, and have probably been to over 75 shows all across the country. I've traveled to all sorts of different venues for concerts, and am absolutely obsessed with music. Um, and it's not just one genre. I love jam bands. I love underground hip hop, and I'm all over the place. So I love obscure artists who like the like who were obscure, like the Black Keys, who have now come to prominence. A band like Portugal the Man is one of my favorite artists. So I'm kind of all over the map. A huge music fan, and so when I get a chance to talk to someone incorporating Bitcoin into music, that's like two of my favorite worlds colliding. So without further ado, I have with me today Armani Cotton from Cypherpunk Studio, and we're going to talk to Armani about what his project is, how he got here, and I'm really looking forward to it. So welcome, Armani.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, why don't you tell people a little bit about Cypherpunk Studio? And tell me too. I've done a little research, and I started getting into it, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna save my learning for our discussion. And so, why don't you talk to me? And I will say though, Armani, when I went to the website, the opening the opening page or the lead page or whatever is super cool, but it was like flashing so much on the side of my screen. I was so distracted. I was like, okay, I gotta close this page. I can't have it up in the background because I just want to keep looking at it. So um anyway,
That's
sorry, it
good.
was just an
It wouldn't.
aside. Yeah.
No, that means it's working. It's meant to keep your
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah. It
Um,
definitely did. So
okay, cool. Yeah, also cool to hear about like your interests outside of um Bitcoin, which I think is for me at least as first like a consumer. Um, the most interesting part of it is just kind of finding out like the adjacent interests and passions and really just the different ways that people are able to express themselves outside of something that obviously takes up so much of our time, which is money. Um, and I guess that kind of like sets the foundation for how Cyberpunk Studio came to be. It really was just like the foundation of Bitcoin deserved better creative. And I have like a pretty like mixed background, both like ethnically, socioeconomically, demographically. I born and raised in New York City. Um, Obviously a very cosmopolitan area, but more specifically in the Lower East Side. If anyone's ever seen kids, it's just pretty much that. You have like Dominican kids, like Polish kids, immigrant kids from like all over the like from Haiti, from Canal Street, and all the rest. So it's just like amalgamation of ideas and tastes and palettes. So um, when I think about even like Bitcoin and the purposes of Cyberpunk Studio, which is to really be a creative partner and a dedicated one to the select brands and companies that are building upon Bitcoin. It was more specifically to assist in what I've just kind of naturally experienced, which is just like, the invention of worlds and experiences and the different IP, which effectively is New York City, even as a brand, to use an example, and how to like embed Bitcoin into those pop cultures and subcultures. So that's the purpose of the studio. It's meant to help serious companies shape the perception, earn the trust, and drive what I feel is like critically important adoption. And for me, I think different creative mediums of expression, like music, like you brought up, fashion, clothing, visuals, sound, are really important ways to be able to communicate what I think we all at large have experienced Bitcoin has been, which is just numbers, charts, and tech. And it's a beautiful part of the design, but there's many different ways to be able to communicate something that's as worldly as what Bitcoin is. So yeah, that's the purpose of it, and we have a tremendous team, and there's a lot of artistic direction, but undergirding all of it is the ability to help communicate what Bitcoin probably more so represents, just because Bitcoin has become such a loaded word. So we've popped up in different expressions. Some we'll talk about, some we won't. But the purpose is just about branding, branding Bitcoin, inventing these worlds and all the things in between it.
Are you working with bands specifically, and helping them?
So
Uh,
no, no bands. I
no.
don't know where
Okay.
that part. Yeah, where that part.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, all good. But I mean, like, as soon as I heard it, I'm like, sick, man. I would love to in the future potentially, but there's no one directly that our studio, which is really just like a creative studio, works with in
Okay.
the world with band. But some of the things that we've worked on have uh, been worn by bands and things like that. So, again, that's a part of the lore of it, but no, not specifically. It'd be sick if we were on tour doing some stuff like that, but that's not a that's not the focus at the moment.
Okay. So, are you more focused on? So who would be ultimately like your customer, your client?
Yep. So, I mean, we have some exciting things coming about in the next year, but an example would be, um, so I'll take something for instance that we did with Clutch Sports, which is actually a little bit less branding, but a little bit more storytelling. In the context of, again, Clutch Sports, don't know if you're familiar with them. That's a sports agency. One of their most marquee clients is LeBron James. So, right, obviously, with that kind of being the face of your agency, you have a lot of talent, and the purposes of that agency is to represent some of the most marquee NBA athletes in the game. But because of the changing landscape, which again, I don't know if you're familiar with, of NIL, which is means name, image, and likeness, where now athletes at the collegiate level and quote unquote amateur level, even beneath collegiate, are able to leverage their brand to be able to basically recoup the money that they're generating through brand deals and things of the like. I was a part of the charge to help lead on the financial literacy of, a single day programming for their NIL group, right? Those who, again, who were looking to enter into the collegiate and the professional level, but had yet to kind of be professionalized in the really traditional sense. Now, like, what does that have to do with like the creative element of it? The byproduct of what was really just a day of financial literacy and kind of reintroducing and reframing Bitcoin from a very technical standpoint. Um, look like certain clothing that I know some people are familiar with, kind of landing in tunnels, with Bitcoin like branding of like, again, motifs and symbols of Satoshi Nakamoto and all those who are around it. So I like to think of having these like really important proof points, right, of like where adoption and the way that we as Bitcoiners most naturally understand it take place in terms of like there's a group of 18 to 21-year-olds who are pretty much on the precipice of becoming multimillionaires. They're going to have a conversation with someone like JP Morgan as well as BlackRock and everything in between. But the reality is they haven't experienced the financial system to the extent that anyone who's over 18 and who has been banked now for like a decade plus has. And I think in that is also the storytelling of money. So using clothing and then, some of the types of events that they've come out to in Paris Fashion Week, just because it's kind of like in and around them, that's kind of where our studio is able to execute things like pop-ups or seating, of different clothing and iconography, the things that kind of create a level of familiarity. So even if on the site, like without hitting it too much on the nose, when we service an agency, we kind of always have like the end-to-end integration. Right? If Clutch is like, okay, there's programming for financial literacy, the other side of that is like what is the creative output, right? Like it's one thing to do this in a closed room. How does this show up on social media, for example? And that has been an example of like not only just clothing, but also I think the verbiage that people use when they talk about money. It's been a fun thing to kind of see that because we'll host like curated gatherings or dinners or things like that. So the studio again is like more of a partner to those who are building adoption, and I think it's kind of like opening the aperture of what adoption looks like. Because I think beyond like a Bitcoiner, someone who holds Bitcoin, there's also someone who culturally resonates with it. So even if you go back to the site, just because it seems like that's like the main reference point, there's a lot of clippings of like things that are a part of Bitcoin's culture, like Fight Club and The Matrix, right? Like we all understand why that, if we really think about it, at least it resonates with our community because a lot of it was very much like the undermining of a very strict system that didn't reflect the needs of the common people, right? But really, it was like a film about contrarian thought and all these things. I thought it was about fighting, but you know, the more you dig, the more you understand that there's like a principle that kind of undergirds every part of it. So, is Bitcoin everything that's contrarian? Maybe, you know, but these things get to pop up in different ways, just like the music, Black Keys, and whoever else you might mention. So. Yeah, that's
But
the
yeah,
thesis around it.
I'm not gonna lie, I completely misunderstood the studio concept. So now I sound
No,
like an
all good.
idiot. I guess maybe I actually should have done the actual research and not left it up completely to this conversation. But that one will be on me. So uh, what has your response been from the people you've talked to about this? Are you talking to people who are coming to you because they're already orange pilled and they're saying, "Hey, there's someone we're associated with. We want to get you in touch with them," or are you sort of going in cold to these people who may have heard of it or have an idea about it but don't really know anything, and then sort of progressing through that process with them,
Yeah.
or that learning
Um,
process? Yeah.
yeah, no, it's good. So, I mean, I'll talk about it through the lens of, you know, because this is ultimately a Bitcoin business podcast. I'll talk about it through like what the client side looks like in terms of assisting a Bitcoin company. And like for the purposes of like next year, which I think is going to be really exciting just because the Cypherpunk Studio has been stood up technically within like the last 3 to 4 months, but it precedes it as a company and is more connected to what I'd been doing in terms of my own career, and maybe we'll touch on some of those things in terms of like
I would love
who
to.
who I've consulted for before. So, you know, prior to this, I had like a long-standing relationship with Swan, and I was their vice president of sports and entertainment. And I kind of held this role while dually having my own individual career as a professional athlete. So, you know, these things aren't completely out of context. So in a way, I've kind of been living a bit of a dual life in the sense that as I was taking over that role with actually having a little bit more boots on the ground, which would allow for relationships like Clutch Sports and others that I'll go into in a little more detail. Um, I was playing for the Panama national team. My mother's from Panama in the World Cup. You know, so I was like literally in Toronto playing Team Canada, you know, while a lot of the things that I just discussed were kind of in real time happening. And a lot of it was not necessarily cold outreach, but because I'm in these sacred spaces, especially for those who have influence, right, within their sphere of sports and entertainment, right? Every player is connected to an agent and to an agency and has a relationship, whether it's in the NBA locker room or they're actually on an NBA roster. So these conversations like happen all the time, right? Um, what are you doing with your money? How are you investing, right? And then it's also, oh, I saw you at this thing. What were you doing over there? You know, so like uh, I think culture is wildly underestimated, and especially in terms of how quickly things move. I think the glimpses that we see are usually on social media, um, but the reality is the relationships in different interest graphs, like you just said, right? If there was anybody in music who was also into Bitcoin, right, that you happen to meet, whatever the level of your relationship was going to be prior is now immediately magnified times 10. So as a result, it's like kind of like the gift that keeps giving. So I feel like by having my own individual career where no one really understood that I was bridging these gaps between different sports teams. One thing that we did very early on that I did for Swan, but also more specifically for Compton Magic, which is like this grassroots AAU program in LA. That's kind of a feeder, a pipeline to NBA teams. So like over the last decade, for basically they've produced 10 lottery picks, which is just like obnoxious statistical numbers for any single person to be involved with. But it was really important to kind of get them into the Bitcoin ecosystem through the lens of financial literacy, because as someone who went through the same pipeline, right, I knew that pretty much at every checkpoint of, oh, you might actually play college. Oh, you might actually play professional. There was always someone who was basically making their case for, I should be your manager, or, I should represent you, or I should handle your money. So the sneakers companies, for example, have long known this, right? So as a result, they stand up these circuits. I mean, like I was a Nike kid for a long time. Why did I identify with Nike? It's because I played on only Nike tournaments and I got so much gear from Nike, and it just became a part of my own identity, right? So in my mind, I was like, why couldn't we be doing the same for money, right? How do you, at what point do you basically introduce yourself into that relationship and build that proximity, right? Instead of being like everyone else, which is, now you're 30 jockeying for this person's attention when they've already had a long-standing relationship with whatever their psychological, emotional, all the things that kind of connect you to money. So I know it seems a bit meta, but like at a very baseline level, if you are someone, if you are a company or an entity that effectively trades on the ability to resonate with a prospective client, and you've done it in all the traditional ways, right? Like, you do traditional marketing, you stand up a really great business, like, well, we are more efficient, we have a stronger concierge desk than anyone else, right? But you're ultimately lacking the ability to be contextual to especially high net worth individuals that happen to be in the world of culture, right? Pop culture, subculture, however you want to define it. Creative is the variable success, and that's what our studio does. We have cadence, right? We have understanding. We also deeply understand the person that you're trying to reach, who can magnify the message tenfold, because that's what culture allows for. Sailor's brilliant, but Sailor also is an Axl Rose. It's just it's just how it works.
Yeah, we're speaking of Sailor, were you down at the strategy for corporations conference?
New York, no, but I
No, no,
do
no,
know.
the one in Orlando.
Oh, strategy for corporations. Yeah, that one.
Y-
No, I didn't. I didn't go to that one.
You
But
did. Okay.
we
All right.
crossed paths in Brazil when he was pitching to Itaú Bank, and I was there with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I have funny sailor passing by stories. Were you there?
I was.
Mm.
I thought I might have seen you there, but
Oh no,
maybe
no,
it was
it wasn't me. My
mistaken.
doppelganger.
Yeah, apparently. I got to find out who it was. uh, but okay, so when you're talking to these, I mean, I love this too because all of these guys are a dime a dozen. They're offering the same. Nike is like it was the same thing like when Jordan was early on in his career, right? It was like Adidas met with him, Reebok met with him, Nike met with him, and it was whoever had the best pitch. At the end of the day, he's like, I'll put on whoever's shoes. And it was ultimately came down to, and I'm sure a lot of this is Hollywoodized and mysticized.
Apologize. Yeah.
Yeah, mythologized. There you go. Thank you. Um, but it was just who gave him the best pitch, who did he like the most, and ultimately that's what all of this kind of comes down to. And what you're saying is now I'm approaching this from a I'm not just pitching you to like me and who I am and what I'm offering, and I took you to the best steak dinner and or whatever. You're saying I have something unique to offer, something totally different, something that you probably haven't heard before, that I guarantee the guy in the Louboutin sneakers and Gucci suit is not pitching you. And also we have this other aspect where we can we can help do something creative and unique with you as an individual. And to me that sounds like it would resonate a lot with some of these younger guys. But what's been your experience on that front?
Yeah. Beyond the younger guys, also brands, heritage brands that otherwise wouldn't touch Bitcoin. And I'll use like a very like uh, a very real example, um, just because it has some network effect, and I'm hopeful for, in 2026, there's going to be some things that are a little bit louder. And John, who ultimately connected us, the reason why I was like very open to have this conversation is just because I feel like you guys speak a lot, from what I understood, like evergreen topics and, the things that ultimately affect the macro of the industry in terms of like Bitcoin entering into a business. So for me, Bitcoin entering into a business sometimes extends beyond just the balance sheet. So a very real world example of that is what I did with the Cleveland Cavaliers in Brazil. So I'll kind of paint you the picture in terms of like what it would mean and why it would resonate and why it becomes a unique offering point. And I'll use this in the example of like what Swan was attempting to do, Swan Bitcoin, right? And what the Cleveland Cavaliers were attempting to do. And ultimately where I've extended the relationship for the individual players on that team and how they now kind of resonate with Bitcoin. So
Were you the guy who orange pilled Tristan Thompson?
no, no, he left before, but I'm quite close with Delhi, and I'm sure
Okay.
he deserves probably more credit than anyone in terms of talking a lot in the locker room, and
Well, I
also
figure all those guys are connected back to the, yeah, and
oh yeah,
Tristan
with
Thompson
his can
left, but
well, maybe I
I'm
should
sure.
insert myself into that because I mean I played Canada when a lot of the prize action was happening. So I like to think, one way or another, I was involved. But no, no, not directly. I won't take credit for
Sure you were. Yeah.
that. But yeah. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, for example, they have like a global strategy to be very prevalent in Brazil, right? Um, They've been there for I think now like the last 3 to 4 years, in terms of actually doing activations and clinics and donations and partnering up with both local and global entities to try and raise the awareness of the Cleveland Cavalier brand. Right now, we obviously know Cleveland in America. That's in Cleveland, Ohio. It potentially would have nothing to do with like Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro or anything like that. But they have a player in Anderson Varejao who has his roots there, and he's like a story player, part of that program. And they had ambitions to make their brand elevated in that space. But beyond that, the NBA, right, which is the overarching brand, and you can almost look at the Cleveland Cavaliers as like a sub brand of this larger one in the NBA. They have their own ambition and mandate to be extremely relevant in Brazil because it's a massive country. It's an incredibly large population. And statistically speaking, they're the number two subscribers of NBA League Pass in the world, which is kind of staggering when you think about it, because obviously basketball is not the biggest sport in Brazil, right? Football is. But by sheer volume of people, they still rank as number two in the world in
Is the
terms of,
U.S. number one?
yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah,
Okay. I thought it
yeah.
might be China.
Oh
They're
no, that's it.
obsessed with
No, I was
basketball
just
over
about to
there.
say that's a
Yeah.
very fair point. But yeah, you would think,
Yeah.
right? No, but yeah, with that, right? So it's like as if you can align incentives with the person who's basically paying you, you're kind of on a good track, right? So obviously it makes sense for them to be as prevalent as they can, understanding it's a part of the NBA's global agenda, right? As they continue to raise like mind share and market, and get as much, you know, um, market share as humanly possible in the game of basketball, which is a global participatory idea, right? No one owns basketball. You can brand basketball, but it's just something that if I roll it out, the game can be played. Everyone can participate. So maybe you can already see where I'm going with like the connective tissue between these two things.
Open source game.
It's an open source game, right? Don't even require the same language to be able to play with each other. I can roll up in Beijing right now and roll a ball on the court, and we can quickly assemble ourselves and play some form of the game, right? So it's a beautiful thing in that. So in that context, a lot of the relationship that I was looking to build between Swan and the Cavs was also still an example of being able to build a relationship between basketball and Bitcoin, understanding what was to come ahead, at least for what Cypherpunk Studio does today, in terms of being able to bridge that gap, whether it be like through programming, a very like clear service and value, what the Clutch Sports had in terms of servicing their NIL clients, right, and providing literacy, or from a brand standpoint in terms of why would Bitcoin as a money resonate and connect more with you as an 18-year-old about to sign your first check, right? More than traditional money and financing and dealing with the suit over here to the right. Like, what does player agency, which is very much trended upward over the last decade in terms of like the ability to actually have ownership of self, of identity. Even like think about the media landscape and the way that players now don't go through any actual platform, but actually speak directly to their constituents, right? Like, what does that have to do with the money? Is there any correlation? We've seen that. We've seen forms of censorship, right? So, like, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. And even if you yourself don't custody Bitcoin, there's cultural elements, right? And principles and just vestiges of what it means that connect back to the person. So when you look at that setup, right, one of the things that we did there, we had like a, a really nice like cocktail, salon. And we had speakers and we had different people engaging in what Bitcoin meant as a brand, right, and as something that could be entering into another global brand's identity, right, and how that basically puts out a casting net to more people beyond those who would never necessarily involve themselves in the brand and the version of there's going to be a lot of fans in Brazil watching the Cleveland Cavaliers play who will never set foot in their arena, let alone in America. So, what is their gravitational pull towards this brand, right? The Cleveland Cavaliers, beyond just a player who is also from the same hometown, right? Is it the cultural elements? What is it? Is it the money? Do you guys share the same like fondness over like? So these are the things that we're kind of lining up, and what that kind of came about was the Cleveland Cavaliers as a brand understanding like, okay, this is actually something that we would be willing to externally communicate, right? Even though there's logistics of not having Bitcoin in their system, but it was something that they use as a leveraging platform to be able to speak and engage with partners in Brazil, who, as we now know, in a Itaú bank, because of what Saylor's been able to do. New bank recently just launched, right? You've obviously seen all these treasury companies. When inevitably the NBA starts planting its roots for the global games, what they've been trying to do in pretty much every single continent, there's no doubt that that will be a part of the conversation in terms of when they're looking for partners, they're going to have to be very literate and fluent in all contexts of what's important to their partner, right? If they're building their whole business on the backbone of this, fluency looks like a lot of different ways. Are we going to give our money to this American sports league or this one, right? What lines up best? So I started seeing Bitcoin much more as a brand tool beyond just something that gets added to the balance sheet. So it was really successful. We had a lot of fun with that. And the trickle down effect was obviously the players who now wear certain clothing and kind of resonate with it. But again, this is like where I get excited just because I think people underestimate the brand value of what Bitcoin offers to companies beyond just what it does to their cash flow.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I never really thought about talking about how the players have now sort of their own direct access to their fan base. They don't have this intermediary anymore. And you even look at someone like Kyrie Irving, who was very vocal about his views on the lockdowns and the jab, and was actually forced out of a game for or
Totally.
many games for going direct to his fans. Same with Aaron Rodgers, and I mean, there's countless examples of this. But it is this new era where you can relate directly to your fans, and you can kind of say whatever you want to, and maybe there's some blowback from the league or whatever, but at the end of the day there's nothing to stop you from connecting directly with the people that watch you and the fan base. And I've never really thought about that as it relates to Bitcoin as well, that um yeah, maybe you're shunned by people that don't understand Bitcoin yet, or even your government or whatever. But at the end of the day, no one can stop you. And
Yeah.
if you want to do it, if you're willing to do it, it's available and there for you. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's really anti-fragile in the way of your behaviors too, which I feel like is a under-communicated point because again, leaning back on the fact that I'm from New York, I've never followed a single rule because it's a rule. I follow it because of consequences, like I jaywalk all the time, not because I'm a badass or, it's intentional, screw the man. It's just because it's never been enforced. I understand it's probably a rule, but like I've rarely used the exact crosswalk when I'm trying to get to where I'm going. Trust me, if it was actually enforced, I'm not going to do it as much. And the same thing for, technically you're allowed to talk back to an officer, right? But I also understand the historical and statistical consequences of that, right? Like I'm allowed to do a lot of things. That's why I always laugh when I see people put up these videos of like, you're allowed to do this. And I'm like, when have we ever followed rules in this world? We only respond to consequences. So
Yeah, it's yeah, it's exactly right. It's just countless. Where do you still live in New York? Or you?
yeah,
Okay, yeah. So I mean, if you ever,
not there
I
right
have some
now.
fan.
We're in
Okay.
Oslo. Yeah.
Oh, all good. I have some family out in California, and yeah, you don't jaywalk there because someone will stop you and give you a ticket. But yeah, in Chicago, here, New York, yeah, no one cares. And so yeah, it's exactly right. You just do what's enforced, or yeah, what's enforced, and what I mean. We're just living through what happens when you don't enforce certain rules and enforce others right now, and it's yeah, very true. So okay, so as you go into 2026, like what do you envisage as sort of what you want Cypherpunk Studio to become? Like do you want to be working with a small team with individuals that you connect directly with? Do you want to grow this thing to have many other people working under you and connect it all over globally? Or I talk to a lot of business owners and people on this podcast, and a lot of them are just, hey, I want to do my niche, connect with my audience. I'm not really worried about growing. I just want to be good at what I do, save in a better money. And I'm curious how you envision Cypherpunk Studio and what you want to do going forward.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm happy to lay it out very plainly. I think like in the um cleanest version, or like the most corporate titled version of like what it is I do as an individual, like I'd be like considered a principal creative strategist or like a creative director in some context in terms of, the direction creatively of how things show up and experiences. That's me as an individual. The purposes of the studio is uh, really to be able to galvanize the resources that I've had afforded to me and some of the talent that thankfully because of previous work uh has come my way, and be able to provide this at a little bit of a larger scale for especially public companies in terms of taking their products and their services and expressing them in different ways. And what does that look like? It looks like, most specifically, especially in this new year, experiences. So, as we all know, there's large conferences, that we stand up all the time in the world of Bitcoin to be able to better communicate what are the purposes. We have talks, we have pop-ups, we have stands, we have all different ways, we even have the opportunity to touch new product, as like a first time. Pretty much every tech company and every business has some version of this to be able to kind of break that fourth wall. I think what Cyberpunk Studio is squarely positioned to do better than anyone because of how native we are to both the cultural fluency that kind of undergirds everything that gets bought and sold, right? The ability to actually understand the consumer segmentation with real teeth, not just, 20-year-olds who happen to be online and date. And so I'm talking about, I've given two examples, and you can imagine beneath that are incredibly detailed elements of like, well, what do they need, right? There's like four different crossovers between Brazil, NBA agenda, subdivision agenda of the specific team, right? This particular stakeholders who could potentially sponsor into a league, right? Just again, aligning incentives. And then what would an experience that provides value to every customer that walks through it look like? And we've seen this in the form of museums, galleries, like everyone creates these experiences. Um, Creatively, I don't think we've done justice by Bitcoin and what it does, right? There's no marketing team, nobody created it, so it's effectively on us. Um, that's what Cypherpunk Studio is looking to provide for large companies that have a very large stack of products and services, being able to creatively express it in different ways. And I'm now kind of like naming an example, but you can imagine that's the things that we're gearing up for, right? How does your product and service show up? And what is the experience for your customer or your pursued customer when engaging with it? And I think even though it's a very techy sounding name, right? Everyone knows the cypherpunks, the originals. I do think experience in real life, particularly as well, as much as how we're going to be able to do it online and how it shows up on your social media platform or sites, microsites. I do think there's going to be a fun moat to create in terms of the in real life experience of what storytelling could be for both products and services. And again, just taking a completely new approach to what we have all experienced as like lanyard land, you know, of just my name tag and let me see it. Oh, it looks nice. Okay. Does it work? All right. So, something a little bit more expressive because we are at the end of the day humans. And we probably fall in love way more with the story than just, well, technically it works more than this one, right? When has that ever been the case for why we choose something? It's a nice jacket, but there's plenty others that are cheaper, but you chose that one.
Are you familiar with the Bitcoin Bugle or Richard Greaser by any chance? No. Okay,
Mm-mm.
so him and a gentleman named Avi Burra, who they're both pretty prominent on Nostr, and they Richard does a lot of stuff in the media space. He does satire, so it's kind of like the Babylon Bee for Bitcoin, if you will. It's pretty funny, but he's doing a lot of stuff with music, and they've been talking about this idea of not just through music, through all sort of forms of art, of getting people. And he was talking with this guy Avi Burra, who uh, I had the pleasure of meeting in Prague, and we have done a podcast together. And he was saying that, yeah, all the number go up stuff is great, and all the inflation protection is great, and everything. But at the end of the day, what's really going to get people into Bitcoin is storytelling. That we have to start telling compelling stories. We have to start getting it out there as opposed to just putting charts up and portfolio performance and look at this graph. And yes, those are simple things, and financial minded people will get it, but there's a lot of people who do not care about money at all, do not care about finances at all.
I was
You
one
could
of them.
tell them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell them, hey, listen, inflation's 8%. You're storing your money in money market accounts that are getting 4.5%. You're losing. They would just go, I don't care. Like I don't know. It's the same money I go buy my eggs and my steak in and whatever. Like I'm doing a job. I have work to do. I have aspirations, and that's all well and good. But every human being, there's something deep down inside of us where a good story. We all love a good story. I mean, even the anti-TV, anti-movie people, of which I am one, still a great movie, a great book, all these things that has a great story behind it, a great TV show. We're all drawn in. We're all captured by that. It's something innately human. And if you're not, yeah, I mean, you're probably like a serial killer, or a sociopath, or like an MK Ultra
Weren't trying
you
to
went
sell
through
you
the MK
anyway.
Ultra. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly. Yeah, you're not the target. You're in the 0.1%, and we don't need to deal with you. But I love this concept, and I've been thinking about it more and more since I listened to those two on the podcast talking about this. And how do we start incorporate storytelling into Bitcoin and draw people in that way? Because I really do think that is a totally untapped market of I guess orange pilling, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And well, first off, that's really cool. I pass along if you have a personal relationship with them. I kind of created my own gravity. So again, a lot of the people who are within the studio, and again, I know apologies for being like a little bit cryptic on terms of some of the previous work and the things that we've done, just because a lot of these projects are ongoing, and a part of the allure is like to not necessarily name names, I just use like an example of like a little bit of a more clear example, just because, recently I won like an NBA strategy award for the work done in Brazil. And it was just like a very interesting take on like, how does one brand and partner with a money that isn't necessarily a product of a company that's selling it, right? So like within that circles, it was a very cool concept to see play out. And then for me as a studio, right, and taking that momentum in the places for me where it's most important, because like you just said, this approach to storytelling as the lever to communicate Bitcoin versus the math has not been used in our ecosystem. And for someone who's only focused on doing that, still having had the background, speak at the at the economic level, I've gone through my own orange pill process and then ultimately landing on, well, of all the things I learned, the anthropological, you know, lens of Bitcoin has been the most interesting. Reading like the Bitcoin Standard, I was more infatuated with like, whoa, it started here. That was the thing that kind of, I was like, I know I'm not special. There's plenty of others who would have, if I just cut out all the numbers and just focused on like seashells, they might have really stuck around for the end of this chapter. So I said that all to say, introduce me to the folks who you mentioned before at some point. But like, yeah, and I think it's one of those things where if you talk about it, right, and it's taken me a while to be comfortable to even have this conversation loudly and publicly, then more people start gravitating towards you. And that's been the effect by the things that we've put out. But I also understand some people really do respond to podcasts and talking and dialogue and lectures. So yeah, I think we need everything. That's any good money has had that. Look at the dollar bill. It's an incredible brand, you know? You have so much tension in it. Beauty in terms of look what the dollar can do. It can, uplift whole communities and, the tension of like, but also look at Wolf of Wall Street. I'm snorting coke off of a dollar bill, right? Like it's kind of critical for the story, even if it's like, no, like if we as Bitcoiners had that, we'd be like, that's bad. That's like our Silk Road equivalent. We don't really do that anymore. It's like it's not but it's a part of the lore. You don't take out the story. It's a part of that tension that ultimately elevates the whole thing. So, I could pontificate on it all day, but as you can tell, this is like the premise of the studio. This is why I've been a silent partner, and now we're about to be a much more vocal and outspoken one, a creative partner to Bitcoin companies that recognize that that has been the missing element to combat narrative. It's like you don't convince anyone. You create the thing, the world view, and allow them to step into it because everyone who I've ever quote unquote orange pilled has realized that they've been a Bitcoiner all along. They just didn't understand that they resonated so much with this part of Bitcoin, right?
It's so funny you mentioned the Silk Road thing because a lot of the people that got orange pilled via the Silk Road, they weren't drug addicts or drug dealers or anything. They just saw a free and open marketplace with money that couldn't be stopped. And it was that story that sold them. It wasn't the fact that like, oh, I can go buy meth or and an assassin or something like that. It was the idea that like there was a marketplace online. It was spun up. It was posted up there. They were they were using a currency that didn't have to have banks. It wasn't regulated. And actually, what pissed off the authorities wasn't the fact that drugs were moving around. For being honest, the biggest drug
No,
dealers on the planet are governments
it
and
really,
their
well,
intelligence agencies. But that's a different story for a different day. But what pissed them off was that there was a free and open marketplace with
for sure.
zero regulation, and they couldn't stop it. They literally had to go get the guy that did it. They spent all this manpower and time trying to go get this one guy so they could go shut the website down, which is ultimately what they did. I'm sure they spent tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars tracking this guy down. And now he's freed, which is great. But it was all because he defied the traditional avenues of commerce. And that's what clicked. It was that story. It was the, hey, you can just do stuff story. The, we don't need intermediaries. Actually, as human beings, if we want to transact with each other or create a marketplace to transact with each other, we should just be able to do that. And the fact that the government couldn't stop the money that was being used to do that, that they literally had to go take a computer and shut the servers down, that is powerful. And that was the story that resonated with people. It was not the ability um, to buy some illicit substance or anything like that.
Yeah. And to be fair, yes, it was a story that resonated with people, but the other stuff resonated with some people too. And that's kind of the beauty of story. Not to I think it
Also true.
elevates your point. I think it elevates your point because that in effect is what creativity and art is. You know, I know we kind of started on a, on a different note. You're thinking through the world of music, right? I'm thinking through fashion, film, microsites, culture, artifacts, things like that, right? And the ways that I've been able to, the studio has been able to seed Bitcoin into places where attention sits. But that in effect is the power of what Bitcoin was. If you want to think of it as like this beautiful artistic project, once you put it out there, you don't get to dictate how people interpret it or the parts that people like, right? Like any director, you probably hear them if they're worth their salt is like, I gotta shut up because for whatever reason they think this is a comedy and I made a melodrama. Damn, you know, that's just the reality of the game. But hey, people love it. You know, once you put it out there, you don't get to dictate. And that's the reality of all great open source participatory, it's for the people projects. And as a result, let's just tell the full story, right? Or provide our lens, right? And our angle, right? And the one that we feel that is resonant because we're all telling a story to some effect. Some are just better at it than others. And the fun part is now we actually get to measure good stories or not because of this thing called social media and platforms. It's like the numbers are right there. That story sucked, and this one, did better. So let's compete because Bitcoin's also a part of that. And for me, like, obviously, basketball is my background, and my actual education is in neuropsychology and clinical psychology. So the further before this is I went to Yale, and I feel like I've always had that mix of competitive and there's the academia of it all. And it's like, well, this is right and that's wrong. But as I've grown older and I feel like more people have experienced the same, it's like it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So as a result, let's while we love the clarity and the binary nature of what Bitcoin is, as humans, we're always going to have a very grade, you know, area for everything that we have. So let's entertain and acknowledge that part because I feel like the clarity of what it is, which has been so helpful for Bitcoin, has sometimes undermined what some people want to hear to make it feel human, which is like, hey, there's some shit here and there's some shit here.
And we're living through the biggest example of this ever right now with Knott's first core. It's like
Yeah.
you must use Bitcoin the way I want to, and it's
Sounds
like
like the
no, you can.
Constitution.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like you can run your own node, and if someone wants to fork the network or operate on different rules, let them. And guess what? It may not be exactly in line with what you want or what you think, but at the end of the day, we all have the opportunity to run whatever version of Bitcoin we want. And if you don't want to run the other person's version, don't do it. And so like that is it's just a perfect encapsulation of no, it's one or zero. Get on your team, get on the red team, get on the blue team, get on your side, get on my side. Like we've we've tried to make everything binary, and everything is a total gray area. There's almost nothing that's binary. There's very few things in life that are truly binary, and um, I mean, you could even take murder. It's like, well, you killed someone, but were you defending your family? Were you defending, your house? Like, well, I guess is that even murder at that point? And so, like, even seemingly binary things are not at the end of the day. There's a ton more that goes into it, and and I've started to notice like that the people that get triggered by everything are the people who think in binary thinking. That when something bothers them, it's because I think this way and you must think this way. Instead of just being like, okay, you think that way, great, we're moving on. Or even, okay, we can have a debate, we can discuss this, we can discuss the merits of both sides and then go our separate ways or not, or change our thinking or whatever. But that it's it, and obviously the algorithms and the point of social media and all this stuff is to get us into that binary thinking and to agitate the shit out of us, um, to make sure we're getting in our appropriate camp. So
I do have a one point to make around that though is I think not I believe and I think history has shown that while yes, of course that anger and division and all of those things are like mathematically strong places to enter through in terms of like communicating your stories. Like, can I get some emotion? You know, anger is a very powerful emotion of all the emotions out there, you know? So, like, yes, but I also think it's lazy. I do. I think it's, people will talk about intellectual laziness. I think creatively it is. I could, I don't even know you, but I could probably come up with some basic things that I think could offend you. You know, it's just like, to get an emotion to make you remember
sure,
this moment
yeah,
to better like put this experience of like, hey, there's a guy in Cypherpunk Studio, and so you remember the name. I'm just gonna really upset you. I think that's lazy, right? And it's short-lived. And anything that's been pervasive and has really done the thing that we're actually trying to do, which is like net good, I would hope, right? If that's our general ambition, like, all right, we talk about how talented our group is as Bitcoiners, right? The intellectual power that supports this system. We have the smartest people working on it, the most focused, the most capital like intensive. Like, okay, then let's show it, like, and that involves art, that involves creative. Because right now, without that, um, it just looks artistically lazy, Like people often talk about like, oh, it's easier to create from a place of pain, like the great artists, they all had this. It's also been some fantastic ones that were in love, you know, really happy, right? So I like some of the happiest creative people to make an attempt to contribute something because there's a reason why the Temptations were around, like they make good
yeah,
love songs about the most hard things to communicate. So it's, and again, both sides, because of course I've created things that have come from like this rebellious, not rebellious, but like, frustration. I don't think Satoshi Nakamoto, as cordially as he wrote, wasn't frustrated, which is what I love to think about him as like an author. I'm like, wow, he penned something that was clearly rooted in immense frustration, and there had to be a hint of anger. Where is
oh
that
yeah,
in his, like what I've read, I'm like fascinated by like if I treated him like a poet, where was that pain? Was it in the code? Was it in the Genesis block? And then he's like, okay, now I'm gonna be very thoughtful and not allow emotions to get, So all these things, but it's a story, right? Even right now, I probably made you fall in love with Satoshi Nakamoto a little bit more by just painting him as a human, right? Experiencing a real life thing. And then, so it's just like we got to do a better job. So that's what Cypherpunk Studio is. That's what I'm about. That's what I'm doing.
I mean, the lore of Satoshi Nakamoto is one of the greatest things about being a Bitcoiner
It's
is
the
the
greatest, and people have not. I'm like, where was? Yeah, someone should have handed me a book immediately. And I'm like, yeah, this is the Bible. This is and it's still not communicated. So anyway, I'm getting to it. I'm working on it. So
okay, nice, nice. I yeah, people are who is Satoshi Nakamoto? It's like I don't care. I love the fact that we have no idea. I think
it's
it's
the best part.
so cool that that we can't ask him, "Hey man, what were you thinking here?" or what were you the fact that it's left up to us to our own interpretations is there's something extra cool about that. Yeah,
It's sick. Yeah.
yeah. Awesome. So as as we go forward here, as we start to enter sort of a new phase of clearly Bitcoin is becoming more well known around the world. Clearly, more people are hearing about it. More people are taking the time to understand it. I'm curious as to your opinion. Do you think institutions like the NBA, like the NFL, Major League Baseball, maybe do you think they will actually start to embrace this, encourage this, or is that just a pipe dream and we're so far away from that and that's never happening?
I think it's twofold. Like capitulation comes in different shapes and forms, right? So obviously the the meat of our conversation has been around like storytelling, branding, communication, marketing, if you just want to label it as that. The example that I gave in Brazil was just like a very high level version of what I was trying to get at, what I feel is coming, if not for it's the things that we've been successfully working on. But what I start to imagine will happen at the entity and institutional level, which is where if you don't agree, or rather, if you cannot create consensus in this very closed system of like the NBA, it's a privately held company, or the MLB or the NFL, right? And you can't get, ownership and board members to all gather around and be like, okay, yeah, let's add it to our balance sheet, which right now is really the most like traditional way of saying like they've adopted Bitcoin, right? I do absolutely see a cultural acceptance of what Bitcoin ultimately represents, right? In any of the worldviews that I've already communicated. To take the example for, with a young sports person, right? Someone who's navigating, the new financial legacy system, and they have to match their current experience as an individual, feeling this sense of like, well, I have player agency, right? Like, no, I get to talk to who I want to talk to, right? Or I own my own brand in a way where before it was very much like the NBA was responsible for each every individual and how they were marketed to, right? It's like, hey, we own this whole thing. We'll pick and choose who becomes big, right? Like if you have a sneaker brand, they're responsible for your image. Like Jordan's amazing, but like I never heard Jordan speak. I saw his commercial, I saw what Nike wanted me to know about him, and then everything else was, he barely got on the mic, and he had a couple lines. He was just like, great game, like it was very tight. Now we get the full spectrum, whether we like it or not, of an individual, right? So I think even that, it's like, well, okay, if that's how I'm moving as an individual in society, what's what do I reflect with that, right? Like, what do my partnerships even look like? Even if I'm not necessarily buying Bitcoin, right? Would I get a sponsorship deal with, this fintech app, right? Venmo, right? Or would I go with potentially Cash App, right? Ah, fuck with it because they got this whole thing about, own their own space, like member of the neighborhood. I resonate with this, like that archetype, that worldview, that POV. That's something that I can really connect with and get behind. So all of these things play a role, and that's where I think that we're going to see it before the what we've now come to see as, oh my God, there's a real path to actually have Bitcoin on the balance sheet for a company. And I think that for those who are watching, right, people like myself who can see behavior change in certain ways, because before there was ever that on the balance sheet, they resonated probably with the man that was Michael Saylor, who was like, this guy is making an outlandish behavioral bet. Whatever it is, I got to take a double look at, right? Because if he wasn't as explicit, right, and as boisterous as he was, I think even that demeanor in itself, like, that's kind of like a Don Quixote, burn the ships, I'm not going back. You kind of have to pay attention. If he just said, hey, I'm going to quietly and steadily deploy a capital strategy instead of being like, I'm not fucking leaving, that, it's like there's a different ways to communicate the same thing. And he chose the most, you know, sexy version of this is what I'm going to do. So, long way of saying, I think that happens first. And I think it
Yeah.
happens and it starts changing the league. We've seen it from players already,
Well,
Kaepernick.
that's yeah, that's what I was wondering. I was thinking, not wondering. I was thinking more you get someone like a LeBron or someone just with totally outsized influence within their league, and you get them to adopt Bitcoin and they start pushing it back into the organization like, hey, you guys should offer the option to do the concessions with Bitcoin. You guys should
I know we all
offer.
imagine, yeah. I'll say this, because I won't speak super on the nose all the time, but like if you go back on your Bitcoin Twitter or wherever people are getting their information, whether it be Nostr or X, there was a moment where a lot of people got excited because they're like, "Oh my God, is that LeBron James wearing a Nakamoto t-shirt?" You know, I just mentioned Clutch. I just mentioned a bunch of these things. sometimes coincidences happen and sometimes they don't. So I think you'll see a cultural shift before you see the behavioral one at the institution level. So like, is now
Oh, I
LeBron a
agree. Yeah.
Bitcoiner? Like, or did
Yeah.
someone just kind of make sure that his stylist was cool enough to think like, oh yeah, this shirt is sick. Yeah, we'll wear that. You know,
Yeah.
No hard
I
wink
definitely
here.
agree. Yeah. Oh, I got you. I got you. I definitely think it's going to come through the players and the culture as well. That they're going to be the ones that go up the ladder and say, hey, you should think about accepting this, or let our season ticket holders pay in Bitcoin. And so
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to watch it play out. And obviously, we're just speculating here. I have no idea,
but it
but I
could.
was just yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think it's both. Like, that's gonna be the fun part, and I think we all get to. What I'm surprised by too is like not a lot. I mean, no one ever really takes credit for orange pilling in the way that like I feel like a very competitive group, which I feel like Bitcoiners are competitive. Do you feel that?
I feel like they are competitive, but amongst each other, they're very collaborative, is what
Yeah,
I found. So, like, they're super competitive against the outside world, but if you're within the community, everyone's actually incredibly friendly, willing to help, willing to work together. And even
yes,
as we've been running Sovereign, the amount of people that have just reached out, like, hey, if I can help in any way, or
right, right,
I will definitely refer some people to you, or love what you guys are doing. And I always tell, they say, who's your competition? I'm like, we don't have any competition. There's other
yeah,
people maybe doing similar things, but I come from a world where my the majority of the business we did was in Chicago, and there were 150 consulting firms in this city. Maybe I'm just making that number up, but it's not 150, it's 80 or it's 175, whatever it is. There's just tons of people. There's just tons of business to go around for everyone, and
no, the pie is
there's just
enormous.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly. The pie is huge. You don't need to stake your claim to uh, a specific slice of the pie. Like that's and so that's what I found is in those circumstances, Bitcoiners are really willing to work together and help each other out. But when it comes to the fiat system
yeah,
or people that don't like Bitcoin or something like that, oh yeah, you bet your ass they're some of the most competitive, ruthless people
yeah,
I've ever seen.
yeah. No, and I actually fully agree with what you're saying. I was thinking also in the way of again basketball being like my background, like my team. Of course, we're trying to beat the other team, but within the team, we're also competitive amongst each other. Like there's like that.
Yeah,
It's a lot of egos, like which is kind of what helps the game continue to grow as it has, just like any other network. It's kind of like a necessary evil. And thankfully we have Bitcoin to kind of like you know kill all of the potential like faults that come with someone's ego. But that's where I'm just wondering, like, oh, internally, because I don't hear too many people talk about, oh, I orange pilled so and so and so and so. But I just think about, like, I don't know. I'm as someone who's looking to contribute to the system in a new and novel way and try and be a little bit more outspoken about it. I wonder, I'm like, would that be like a healthy ingredient? Like how many like you can you can get in potentially the different ways, because I feel like we are so collaborative, and as a result sometimes we subscribe to like this is how we do it. And I'm like, does it require some like competitive nature? It's like, yeah, but I'm doing it this way and look how many I'm getting. Anyway,
I,
just a thought.
I mean, I actually love that idea to where you could, I mean, that could be part of your marketing, right? Hey, we've orange pilled this many people. Hey, do you want to be a referral partner with us? Because look at how many people we've gotten into Bitcoin. Or, hey, do you have some branding needs? Do you have some media needs? Come with us because this is how many people we've affected. And businesses do that all the time, right? Like McDonald's puts it how many burgers they've sold right on
Yeah,
their
so
billboard,
fun. Yes.
So like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So we've done that within, because we've been very thoughtful about who we've serviced, just because we want to be really mindful about the network effect that comes with it. Because obviously, creative is such a big part of how a company shows up, right? And attaching yourself to like their mission statement, their vision, because brands are obviously very protective about how they show up in the world. It's allowed for like a nice select group. Some who again want to be completely like, removed from like talks because a part of the allure is the allure. And then just like how you said, like really magnifying, like, hey, this is the way in which we are competitive with like our market. Like this is how many we're serving, not in the traditional sense, but like even within your own community, because we're all trying to get Bitcoin adopted. Um, yeah, and it is probably something that I'll give a proper thought to. Um,
Yeah,
because yeah, it
me
is.
too. I gotta think more about that, but I like that. I mean, that should be a sales point, no pun intended, right? Like
You know,
we've 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 done this many deals, and yeah, every business is we've done 50 deals in this industry or 50 deals, and it's a big selling point for people doing stuff. So yeah,
sure.
yeah, no reason we can't do that. So. All right, Armani. We've gone a little over an hour here and want to be respectful of your time. But anything else you want to touch on before we go here? Anything about Cypherpunk Studio or anything before you let people know where to find you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you again for the time and opportunity to speak about Bitcoin and what I hope is like a different way for the audience. Like my main goal is hopefully this bringing value to anybody who is obsessive around Bitcoin and all the things around it are perhaps just curious, and then just like another corridor from which to enter into Bitcoin and see it differently because I feel like everyone remembers like their aha eureka moment, um that feeling of discovery, right, which is like really intoxicating. I think that's part of what has made Bitcoin really refreshing for everyone who's been in it for so long. That constant like feeling of discovery, whether it's of self or of Bitcoin. um what I will say is, right, like Cypherpunk Studio meant to be a dedicated partner to serious Bitcoin companies, both public and private, that are building on it and helping their IP services and products show up in immersive storytelling, right? Whether it be on socials, but more specifically in experiences, which is something we're focusing on in 2026. The main mandate that I feel like I would put out to the community and challenge everyone is create, find new ways to create. Allow everyone who does not consider themselves a Bitcoiner to step into a world in which they actually feel that they share the same ethos and sentiments as we do. Create the world and people will come to it. I think we're way too focused on convincing because as someone who considers himself pretty persuasive, I've never convinced anybody. I've just demonstrated incredible conviction. And that has been like really potent. People tend to follow that. Uh, I mean, that goes back to the Sailor example for those who feel like they've been orange pilled. They didn't get convinced, they saw conviction. And that is a really powerful thing. And we as humans really resonate with that. So build your story, create it, and allow people to step into it.
That's such a good point. And what we're finding at Sovereign as well is it's not going out convincing people, showing them stuff and putting graphs or charts in front of them. It's developing personal rapport with someone and saying, "Okay, you're really convicted about this. You left a very nice job of 20 years to go dedicate your time to this. Clearly this means something to you." Or when we have some sales folks that are out talking to other people, they're never selling them on, hey, check out this graph, and if you had bought Bitcoin in 2010, you'd be living on an island
Mhm.
somewhere. It's always the relationship that you have with that person, and I trust you, I want to hear more. Oh, that's really cool, you've done this with your life. Now I'm willing to listen more. And that's been time and time again, is the way to get to people is your conviction and your story that they resonate with, and trusting you as an individual as opposed to some sort of abstract economic concept that in reality they probably don't even care about.
For sure. Couldn't agree more.
Anyways, all right, we'll wrap on my long-winded rant
Oh
there.
no, that was right.
Where thank you, first of all, thank you so much for coming on today. I love this conversation, and I don't know if you drink or not, but I would love to have a whiskey or a beer or a glass of wine or something. I feel like we could
For sure.
get way
For
down the
sure.
rabbit hole on a lot of different stuff, and
For sure.
lose 3 or 4 hours to the night. But
I love it.
where should people go to check you out?
Yeah. So first off, like I'm a big email guy. Check it for all sorts of things. And right now, like my dedicated one is 11. That's the number 11, 11 at ArmaniCotton.com. So shoot me an email about anything. It's always getting checked. Let me know there's and LinkedIn is kind of now where I'm stepping out into to be able to communicate what Cypherpunk Studio is now offering to companies a little bit more explicitly than how we've worked before, because ultimately, I think our world, Bitcoin companies, the other side of me, I would kind of call it, deserve this level of creative too. So on LinkedIn, it's just Armani Cotton. You can find me there, and then Cypherpunk Studio. The LinkedIn is there, and through there, I'd rather you then find our microsite so you can kind of dig into the full storytelling. But you can find it through ArmaniCotton.com. Email me at 11 at ArmaniCotton.com, and then I'm on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thank you so much for coming on. As always, this is the Sovereign Bitcoin Business. It's the Bitcoin Business Podcast by Sovereign, and we're on X at Sovereign X. We're on LinkedIn as well at Sovereign. We're on Noster at Sovereign, and we are and Sovereign.io, the website. If you want to reach out, we have a contact form there, and we will definitely get back to you. So, thank you so much for listening.